Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your County Commissioner, Karen Valenzuela. I think that I was asked to introduce our special guest this evening because one of the things your county commissioners do for you that people don't always remember is, in addition to being your commissioners, we're also your local Board of Health. And it so happens that I am the chair of the Thurston County Board of Health this year, and that's a delight for me because before I became your commissioner, I had also been a public health worker for 20 years. And so I'm happy to be here this night and happy to be here this evening and happy to be able to introduce our distinguished guest. The American Public Health Association, of which I've been a member for well over 2 decades, I'm sorry to have to admit, along with the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Nurses Association, and several other national common health organizations have all warned that climate change threatens human health, and all of these organizations have called for swift action to address the public health impacts of climate change. And so this evening, we're joined by Dr. Wendy Ring. And Dr. Ring is the founder and organizer of Climate 911, a national organization of physicians dedicated to raising the alarm about climate change as a public health emergency. Climate 911 advocates for prompt and effective solutions to address this public health emergency. So Dr. Ring was trained at Yale and Columbia, where she received both her MD and her master's in public health, and was medical director of a community health center in California for more than 20 years. She has been recognized by our United States Congress, the California Legislature, and the American Medical Association for her work in improving access to care for the underserved. She was also named America's Best Healer by Reader's Digest. Dr. Ring takes breaks from climate activism several times a year to fill in for other physicians in community health centers, but says that she believes she can save more lives by catalyzing action on climate change than by treating patients one-on-one. And so I'm thrilled to be able to welcome Dr. Wendy Ring to our community this evening. Thank you for joining us, and please help me welcome Dr. Ring.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, everyone. I've got to get out of the way of the picture, don't I? Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. So as you heard, I have been a family doctor for about 30 years, and the only reason that I very sadly and tearfully say goodbye to my patients is because I believe that we are in a moment of crisis, and that if we do not act now, it will be too late. So, and I think that the right way to talk about climate change is not as an ideological issue, but as a health issue. So that's what I'm going to talk with you tonight. First, what I want to do, though, is I want to thank you all for coming and being willing to look with me at this very distressing topic. The psychologists say that the situation that America is in right now, and actually most of the developed world, is that it's not that most of us are climate deniers, but that we know that climate change is happening, and yet the feelings that creates in us when we look at it straight on are so distressing that most people just block it. So they're in climate denial. And I myself sort of alternate between thinking I'm crazy because everything looks the same and everyone's going on as if there's no big deal happening, and thinking that that we're going to be bringing about the end of life on Earth. So there's other emotions that are very common: helplessness, guilt, because we all know that the way we live is contributing somewhat. And fear and anxiety, and I'm sure that I'm not alone in my feelings about that. So thank you very much for being brave and coming out to hear about this. I'm going to talk about some scary stuff, But then after we do the scary stuff, then I'm going to talk about how easy it would really be to fix this problem and how it would benefit our health to do so. So if you'll bear with me, we'll go into the darkness and then we'll come out into the light. So first of all, let's just do a little review of climate science. If scientists could speak English, this is what they would tell you. Carbon is the basic building block of life. Everything that's alive is made out of carbon. And to demonstrate that, I've put up the molecular structure of our 4 basic food groups. So you could see the black balls are the carbons, and you can see that that's what holds everything together. So everything that was ever alive has carbon in it. And when we burn things that were once alive, that carbon combines with oxygen and creates carbon dioxide, or CO2. So when you hear CO2 and carbon dioxide, that's what people are talking about. And we've got some blank slides in here, so we'll just have to bear with. And so when we burn the CO2, we've got a lot of blank slides. We're burning about twice as much as what our planet can handle. And so a quarter of that carbon dioxide is absorbed by the oceans, another quarter is absorbed by the forests, and the other half is beyond the ability of our planet to manage. And so it goes up into the atmosphere and forms a blanket around the Earth, which is trapping the heat of the sun, and that's why it's getting warmer. And it's been warming by about 1/10 of a degree per decade for the last century. But since 1970, that has speeded up, and we're warming about 3 times faster on average. This map is showing how much increase in temperature we're having every 10 years since 1970. And you can see that it's not equal. So some states are experiencing much more problems with heat than others, and Washington is certainly not in the worst situation. The other thing that we're experiencing is more extreme weather. We have the drier parts of the country are more dry, the wetter parts are more wet, and we're seeing heavier storms, we're seeing much more frequent and longer heat waves, fire seasons, etc. So what does it mean for our health? Maybe I should just hold this so I don't have to go do that. Is that too distracting? No? Okay. All right. So, climate change affects our health by affecting the things that are essential for our health. Can I get any guesses as to what those are?
Clean water.
Okay.
Clean air.
Air.
Clean
Water,
soil.
I heard someone say.
Soil. Soil.
Food. One more.
Disease.
Yeah, safe place to live. So when these things are affected, then our health is affected also. So I believe that people learn best when they are thinking and participating. So this is going to be, I'm going to have you all play doctor with me, but you get to keep your clothes on. And I'm going to tell you about some people that got sick. And we'll think together about what might be the matter with them and how that would relate to our changes in our climate. Okay, ready? All right. A mother brings a 10-year-old boy to the doctor because of a cough that won't go away. And he had formerly been very involved in sports. He played soccer, he played Little League, but now he is avoiding outdoor activities and spends most of his time in front of the computer. What could be the matter with this young man?
Asthma.
Oh, you all are so sharp. That's it. It's asthma. And what does asthma have to do with climate? Go ahead.
I'm going to spoil it. Higher temperatures make more ground level ozone, which increases asthma.
Absolutely, that's one. And that's probably the major one. So what happens is that ozone, well, there's 2 kinds of ozone. There's, we don't even have that slide, sorry. We'll go back to this one. There's 2 kinds of ozone. It's the same stuff, but ozone that's way up in the stratosphere is good because it's blocking ultraviolet rays and keeping us from getting skin cancer. But ozone down at ground level is a severely irritating to our respiratory system. And so when levels of ozone are higher, we see more people coming into the emergency room and being admitted to the hospital with breathing type problems, asthma and chronic bronchitis, emphysema, that type of a thing. And ozone is formed, the ground level kind, is formed when pollutants that are released into the air when we burn fossil fuels and other things combine in the presence of heat and sunlight. So the warmer it is, the more ozone we get. And the levels can increase quite dramatically in the summertime, especially in cities or in places where the lay of the land creates valleys where those kind of air pollutants can get trapped. So this is just showing you over here two little graphs. The bottom is temperature, and the vertical up and down is showing you ozone levels. And those are some pretty extreme ozone levels that are developing in Atlanta and in New York and cities all around our country with warmer temperatures. So ozone, as I said, it irritates the lungs. It puts people who have lung disease into flare-ups and increases hospitalizations. Ozone also causes asthma in children. And children are more sensitive to ozone because they breathe faster than we do. And the more frequently you breathe, the more ozone you're breathing in. So kids who play sports are actually have the highest levels of asthma related to ozone. Kids that play 3 or more sports in areas that have high levels of ozone in the daytime have about 3 times the risk of developing asthma as kids who sit on the couch and watch cartoons.
Yeah.
Ozone also increases deaths. And whenever you see a graph that has a straight line like that, what that's telling you is there's no safe level. We sort of arbitrarily decide how much death and disease our society can handle, and we say, okay, that's the safe level. But really and truly, it's directly proportional. So, the more exposure there is, the more people die. And this happens even at levels that are below the standard that our Environmental Protection Agency says is okay for human health. But about 40% of Americans actually live in areas where the levels of ozone are not okay for human health. They're above the EPA standards. And we're making some progress at bringing them down because of having cleaner burning cars, but we're experiencing what they call a climate penalty because even though we're putting less of the ingredients into the air, with the increased heat, we're driving the reaction faster. So we're ending up with more ozone than we would have. Another reason that we're seeing more asthma is because carbon dioxide increases pollen production. And some scientists did an experiment where they grew ragweed, which is a common plant that makes people sneeze. And they grew it under different concentrations of carbon dioxide. So they grew it under pre-industrial levels of carbon dioxide, and then like what we have today, and then like what we expect to see in about 2075 if we don't do something. And the levels of pollen that were produced exponentially increases. We're also seeing an increase in the growth of poison ivy with current levels of CO2, and an increase in the amount of and type of urushiol, which is the stuff in the poison ivy that gives you that reaction. So mold is another factor in the increase in asthma, and with heavy rain, which we're experiencing, and here I know that you all are, I've been told you're getting much heavier rainfall than you had before. So there's more flooding and more leaking in houses, and when walls and things get wet, we have the formation of mold. So when there's mold, we do see increases again in visits to the emergency room for people with asthma, and flare-ups, people who have allergies, and increases in the number of kids who get admitted to the hospital with asthma. But we also know now that mold causes asthma. And there was a study that was done where researchers went into, they were following a group of kids who were all born around the same time, and they went into their houses when they were 8 months old and took an air sample. And then they watched to see who was going to end up getting admitted to the hospital for asthma. And they found that the houses that had the most mold in the air sample when those babies were 8 months old had a much higher risk, twice the risk of ending up in the hospital with asthma before the age of 7. So it's not surprising that this is what we're seeing. And you might think, well, maybe it's from something else, you know, maybe it's because we cleaned our houses too good, or, you know, there's other factors that could be involved. But there's a big laboratory that takes care of hospital and doctor office specimens all over the country, and they took a look back at their allergy test results for over a 4-year period, and they found that there was an increase in the number of positive allergy tests for, guess what? Mold and ragweed. And that the other things that we know cause allergies, either the number of positive tests decreased or it stayed the same. Wildfire smoke is another climate-related effect on our air quality. Wildfire smoke contains some nasty stuff. It irritates our breathing. It has carcinogens. But the most dangerous thing is that it has these very, very fine particles, which are called fine particulates, and they're easily inhaled into the lungs, and then they're so small that they can pass from the lungs into the bloodstream, where they cause inflammation. And because of that, we see more asthma attacks and more kids visiting the hospital, and also admissions for bronchitis and for pneumonia. But also we see more heart attacks and more heart failure and more strokes. And also, if women who are pregnant breathe wildfire smoke, their babies have lower birth weights. This is something that we learned in California after our big fires that we had back in 2003. So this is not just a problem where the fire is burning, because these fine particulates are very easily carried on the wind. And this is a satellite picture from NASA that shows the fine particulates spreading from a wildfire in New Mexico all the way to Denver, Colorado. Another effect on air quality is dust storms. I don't think you have to worry about that here, but in Southern California and in Arizona, New Mexico, we are seeing with the kind of chronic drought that we're having an increase in dust storms because there's less vegetation holding the soil down. And this is a mile-high dust storm coming over the city of Phoenix. And in the dust in those areas, it's not just pieces of dirt. There are bacteria, there are fungi, there are heavy metals, a lot of nasty stuff. And as a result, what we're having down there is epidemic, an 800% increase in the number of cases of valley fever, which is a kind of pneumonia caused by a fungus that you get from inhaling dust that has the fungus in it. And most people who get this just have sort of like a mild walking pneumonia, and then they get better. But some people, especially if you're over the age of 55, black, Filipino, have diabetes or some other problem where your immune system isn't working as well, or you're taking treatments that kind of dampen your immune system, then it can spread through the entire body and can be a cause of death. We don't actually have a medicine to eliminate this kind of infection. The other concern is that we have, there's a mineral that's kind of like asbestos that is common in some of the same areas where we get the dust storms. And just like asbestos, it causes a very rare kind of cancer of the lining of the lungs called mesothelioma. And there's no treatment for that either. And we have not done the studies to measure, to take that dust in the dust storms and analyze it. But there have been some studies done in looking at farmland in this area in Southern California, in the Central Valley, and they have found in air samples in the farm fields that erionite fibers. So, and we wouldn't know about whether or not this is going to affect anybody until 30 years later, because this is something that you get exposed now, you get cancer in 30 years. Another problem in the more urban areas is lead poisoning. We have a legacy of lead in our soils, especially in areas where there was a lot of traffic because of all of the years that we had lead in gasoline. And what happens is when the soil is very dry, and in the summertime, that dust gets suspended into the air and the lead along with it. And so children, during those periods of time, have higher levels of lead in their blood. And what we know is that if you have higher levels of lead in your blood, it causes permanent neurologic damage. And we keep decreasing in this country the level that we think is safe. For example, I took care of a lot of kids who maybe had a blood level of 10, and that was supposed to be okay, but now it's not okay if it's over 5. We have about 500,000 kids in the U.S. who have blood lead levels over 5. Now this is a problem that can only be fixed by controlling the climate, because it's not like lead paint in a house where you can go in and clean it up. We're talking about the soil in all of our urban areas and in some rural areas where there are industries that put a lot of lead into the air. So I'm going to show you what this means to us. These are test scores from kids in Detroit. And the other slide that I showed you that had this sort of wavy line that went up and down, those were the children's lead levels going up every summer and then back down again. And that was looking at about 300,000 kids over a period of about 10 years. So we know that's what's really happening. But the kids who have the higher levels of lead are the ones who test out at not proficient and partially proficient, and the kids with the lower levels of lead are the ones who do better on those tests. So we're condemning a large number of children to not be able to live up to their full potential if we are not able to bring our climate under some kind of control. Okay, next case. There was a health department in a mid-sized city which kept getting calls from pharmacists because so many people were coming in and buying diarrhea medicine that they couldn't keep it on the shelves. So the health officer thought something must be wrong, and they investigated. And by the time they found out what the problem was and addressed it, 400,000 people had become ill with fever, abdominal cramps, vomiting, and diarrhea. This is a true story.
Bad water.
You're right. It was in the water.
Oh.
So, and what it was something called cryptosporidium, which is a kind of infection that where the bacteria are not killed by chlorine. So, how did the cryptosporidium get into the city's drinking water? What did climate have to do with that? And it's got to be someone else who answers now. Everyone who's already said is.
Flooding?
Flooding? Yeah, could be. But it wasn't. It could have been.
Biosolids? Biosolids?
I'm sorry?
Biosolids.
Biosolids? I don't even know what that is, so.
That's what they take from the septic tank and up to a certain place and pump it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it wasn't that. It was actually a little more direct. So when there is heavy rain, you know, we're getting about, in some parts of the country, we're having about 40 to 70% more heavy rain. Only 5% more rain overall. But in California, at least, we're having a lot less snow. And so when it comes down, and in the Northeast, that's true too. And so when precipitation comes down, we get more of it as rain. And we'll also get more of it in heavy amounts of rain that the land cannot absorb. So this is flooding. This is a flash flood. And that's how most people who die from heavy rainfall die in vehicles drowning in flash floods. And the moral of that story is if do not drive when you can't see the road. If there's water there, don't go. Because it only takes about 12 inches to float your car away. It only takes about 18 inches to float and flip an SUV, and once that happens, you can't, your chances of getting out are very small. But back to the how did the bacteria get into the water? There's a kind of sewage system which is common in this country. About 700 cities in the U.S. have, that's called combined sewer overflow. And what it means is that the same pipes that carry away the raw sewage are also supposed to carry away the storm water. But they weren't built for the amount of storm water that we now have. They were all built with a sort of a fail-safe system so that if there was too much stuff running through the pipe than the sewage treatment plant could handle, then it would overflow that little sort of halfway dam that you see inside the pipe and dump into a nearby river or harbor or bay. And that is how the cryptosporidium got into Milwaukee's water supply. And they had an intake for their drinking water plant that was very near the outflow of one of those pipes. I put the Allegheny River picture up there just because Pennsylvania has the highest number of combined sewer overflow sewage systems in the country, and the highest number are around Pittsburgh, and this is people swimming in that river. Not good. The University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute did an interesting experiment. They collected catfish from two different places in the river. One place that had a bunch of these outflow pipes, and another place that didn't. And they made them kind of fish extract, and they put them on human breast cancer cells that were sensitive to estrogen, as many breast cancers are. And the fish that came from near the outflow pipes had about twice as much growth in those cells as the fish that came from the areas that did not have the outflow pipes. Because even though our water treatment system can't eliminate those hormones completely, it does a fairly good job. It takes out about 98%. But if you bypass the treatment and dump the water right into the river, that's what you get. Of course, there's other ways that sewage systems malfunction in extreme weather. The fountain that you see there is storm water mixed with raw sewage that's coming up through a manhole. This is not an uncommon sight. There used to be one in our community where I live in California, but we ripped up all our streets and fixed the combined sewer system, but it was a huge and expensive project. And then the photo of New Jersey is 5 weeks after Hurricane Sandy, when the storm surge sent raw sewage flying back out of sinks and toilets into people's homes. And it was taking a really long time to get them all cleaned up. You can imagine what kind of a disease situation that would be. The other thing that happens, of course, is that when there is real flooding, the floodwaters contaminate the water treatment facilities and make the sewage treatment facilities overflow. And as a result of all these things, we can conclude that our water system is not secure, and it cannot protect us from the disease that's caused by contamination of drinking water with sewage. The majority of the outbreaks of gastroenteritis, then drinking water contamination that happen in urban areas are the result of, they come right after heavy rainfall. This is a prediction that was done about kids going to the emergency room with diarrhea. And what they did is that they sort of said, well, we're going to make a graph of rainfall. And then we're going to make a graph of visits to the emergency room for diarrhea. And they put the blue line, which is the rainfall line, next to the black line, which is the kids. And you can see that it fits just perfectly. We're also seeing an increase in outbreaks of infections from water that people get when they're recreating, when they're boating and paddling and swimming. And even though health departments test beaches and frequently close them, and if you go to the, there's a beach page on the Washington Department of Health website, which you should probably check before you go to the beach, because it will tell you which ones are closed. So what else is in floodwaters? There's often, in addition to bacteria and viruses that cause disease in people, like diarrhea and hepatitis, there's also pollutants, industrial pollutants that would have been treated, and there's a lot of kind of contaminants that we have that will never degrade, and they've sort of settled down into the soil or into the sediment somewhere. And when you have a lot of heavy streams of water rushing over them, those are mobilized again. We're talking about lead and PCBs and things like that, and put back into the water, where they again concentrate and come up the food chain to the fish that people eat. Then there's a whole other category of water effects that have to do with water temperature. When the water is warmer, we see, and we're having a lot of this right now, is increased blooms of blue-green algae. And this also has to do with heavy rainfall, because when you have heavy rain in farming areas, that's when the nutrients are washed into the water, and that, in combination with the warmer water temperature, is what provokes the blooms. And I was in Seattle yesterday, and they were telling me that they're having this problem with dog dew washing into the water and provoking algae blooms. Yeah, so it's not. I guess it's not just agricultural areas, but the this algae, this blue-green algae, makes a toxin called microcystin, which is severely toxic to the liver, and especially for children and dogs, and because they're smaller, so it takes less of a dose to harm them, but also because they tend to play at the water's edge. And if you ever look at one of these algae blooms, there's usually kind of a crust of algae stuff that's piled up along the water's edge. It's blown in by the wind. And the concentrations of that toxin microcystin can be up to 1,000 times higher in that area, in that nearshore area where the children and the dogs play, than out in the middle of the lake. Unfortunately, you can't always just tell by looking at the color of the water, because there has been some testing done. We don't routinely test. The health departments don't routinely test for microcystin in water, but when they do test, in reservoirs, in surface water, that's the source for public drinking water systems, they find it. And about a third of the time, in the Midwest anyways, when they were looking, and there was no visible algae, they were still finding dangerous levels of microcystin. Now, our water treatment systems will fix that. They do take it out if they're working. If you have a failure like the Milwaukee one, and they do happen from time to time, then you would get some microcystin in your drinking water. Or if you went swimming and swallowed some, that could happen. But the other problem that with blue-green algae blooms is that when the algae dies, you've seen that mess that when it's rotting, and you know that algae is breaking down, and the carbon from that algae goes into the water. It's called dissolved organic carbon. And when you're in the water treatment plant and they add the chlorine to kill the bacteria, that combines with that dissolved organic carbon and creates what they call disinfection byproducts, which are carcinogenic. And a lot of water systems are struggling with that problem now. And smaller water systems don't have the money to to pay for the kind of equipment that you would need in order to eliminate that. Okay, here's another case. John Williams developed nausea, vomiting, and tingling around his mouth one night about half an hour after dinner. When the tingling spread to his arms and legs, he thought maybe he was having a stroke and decided to get medical assistance. So he drove to the hospital, like a man, you know, don't call 911. But by the time he arrived, he was too weak to get out of the car or to shout for help. And luckily, somebody found him in the parking lot, because within an hour and a half after being brought into the emergency room, he was completely paralyzed and had to be put on a ventilator. So what happened to John?
Shellfish.
Shellfish poisoning? Yeah, he had paralytic shellfish poisoning. And this is something that we're seeing more of because of the harmful algae blooms that happen in seawater that's getting warmer. And there's actually more than the paralytic kind. That's the most common kind that we see. But there's another kind called neurotoxic shellfish poisoning, which is more common around Florida and the Gulf Coast. And that is, involves weakness and numbness, and also a reverse sensation of hot and cold. So it feels, cold things feel hot and hot things feel cold. But it also aerosolizes it when the waves crash against the shore, how there's that nice cool thing that we all like to walk in. Well, that has the toxin in it, and that causes constriction of the breathing tubes, so that people who are walking by there, especially if they have asthma or any kind of a lung problem, all of a sudden are not able to breathe very well. Then there's a third kind, which is called amnesic shellfish poisoning, and that has been up here, and in California, we're seeing a lot of sea mammals who have had this kind of poisoning, and this causes, some same kind of short-term diarrhea type thing, but then a loss of short-term memory, which is permanent, and with heavy exposures, seizures, which also don't go away. And what we've learned from the sea mammals and from some experiments that have been done is that even very small quantities of that particular toxin that are not enough to make a pregnant mother feel ill pass through the placenta and cause brain damage and seizures in the offspring. Another infection that we're seeing more of is Vibrio, and this is also a result of warming of the sea. Vibrio is a bacteria that lives in the ocean. It's normally there, but when the water is warmer, that bacteria multiply faster. And so when there are higher concentrations of Vibrio in the shellfish, people can get sick. And there's two kinds of Vibrio infections. One kind is just a fever and serious vomiting and diarrhea, make you wish you were dead. But the other kind just makes you dead. It's the bacteria goes right into the bloodstream and shuts down your organs, and that's why Vibrio is the cause of about 90% of the deaths related to consumption of seafood are because of Vibrio infection. And the rates are increasing. You can't see the slide, but the rates of Vibrio have been increasing dramatically all across the country. These things are also very, very expensive if you have aquaculture industry. And in California and in Chesapeake Bay, and I know in Alaska, and I think here also, there have been some pretty large financial losses because the shellfish had Vibrio, or they had too high a level of these toxins, and they had to be shut down. And recreational shellfish collecting is fairly routinely, there are beaches that are closed to it, and I had a slide, but I don't think it's going to show up. No. Oh, this is the Vibrio one. Oh, we got that one. That's good. That shows all the areas on the Washington coast that are closed to collection of shellfish. And when I say shellfish, I don't mean crabs. So we're talking about the ones with the shells, the clams, mussels, oysters. And some places are only closed to certain ones, especially butter clams and varnish clams, because the toxin that's in the butter and the varnish clams stays for a long, long time. So up to a year after that algae bloom is over and the toxin is no longer in the water near them, they can still have toxic levels of these algal toxins in them. So if you do go collecting, again, go online and check the place that you're planning to go, and then make sure you know what a butter clam looks like.
Those are all filter feeders.
Yes, and so they're concentrating it.
Right.
Yeah,
How
exactly.
about crab? Did you say crab?
Crab, no.
Oh, crab is okay.
Crab's
Right.
okay. But
it's a
scallops, I
bottom
think,
feeder.
yeah, scallops and mussels and clams and oysters.
All those two-shelled bivalve
Yeah.
mollusk guys.
So we're talking about food right now, and effects of the climate on food. Of course, one of the biggest ones is crop failure, and we're having two kinds of effects. One is when we don't have enough rain, which has been the case for the last two growing seasons in about 90% of the U.S. agricultural land. But also, then we've had too much rain, and sometimes in some of the same areas. And when there's too much rain, then the crops get diseases, like that's called crazy top, and they don't produce. So when that happens, of course, the price of food goes up, and also the rate of suicide among farmers goes up. But we have a lot of families in this country who are what we call food insecure, which means that they don't always have enough money to buy food to make 3 meals a day. And when you have a 13% price increase, and what goes up first is the price of dairy products, meat, chicken, eggs, and when that goes up, then those families are probably not going to be able to buy those things. And what we know about food insecurity is that it has lasting health consequences. So children who come from food insecure families have an 8 to 11 times higher rate of iron deficiency anemia than kids who come from other families. And that's very important, because what that means is that they don't have enough red blood. And red blood is what does the job of carrying oxygen from your lungs to your brain. So kids who are anemic don't do well in school. And unfortunately, we don't really understand why, but even if you diagnose the anemia and you give them enough iron to make the anemia go away, you can't reverse some of those learning problems. Adults from food insecure families tend to fill up on cheap, empty calories, and so they have higher rates of obesity and of diabetes. But the other issue, aside from quantity of food, is the quality of the food. And we talked a little bit about the shellfish and them being unsafe with the toxins, but there are also toxins in plants, and aflatoxin is a kind of a natural. It's one of the most potent natural cancer-causing substances known, and it goes on corn plants that it's a product of a fungus that grows on corn plants when they're stressed. And for the last couple of years, with the drought that we've been having increased amounts of aflatoxin showing up in corn. So this is just a map showing you all the green triangles they're not triangles, they're diamonds, are areas where there were high levels of aflatoxin found in corn. Now, we have limits on how much aflatoxin can be in corn that's for human consumption, and we have limits on how much can be in milk, because if we feed it to cows, it comes out in the milk. And we also have limits that are quite a bit higher on how much we can feed to animals that were going to be used for meat. But the places on this map all had levels that were higher than those limits. And so what our Food and Drug Administration did was they said, gee, we really don't want to make your lives any worse and make you throw away your corn crop, so why don't you just mix it with some corn that doesn't have aflatoxin in it, so until the concentration comes down to our levels. But that has the effect of increasing the amount of aflatoxin that we eat. It could be, who knows how many more times, 2 times, 4 times, 10 times more. So this is something that's going on now. Now, in other countries where there has been more drought, people have very high levels of aflatoxin, and aflatoxin causes liver cancer, and it does that because it binds to the DNA in the liver and turns off a gene that's there to stop tumor formation. So it's a bad thing in and of itself, but it's a much worse thing if you have another condition in your liver that already has you at risk for developing liver cancer. For example, chronic hepatitis. But what we have in the United States, which I think is very worrisome, is we're having an epidemic of chronic liver inflammation that's related to being overweight, and it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And about 30% of American adults have this, and it's predicted to increase. So if you have someone who has this, this kind of a condition, and then you add the aflatoxin to it, you could get a 60 to 100-fold increase in the risk of liver cancer. And this does not fall equally on everyone, as you can see. Hispanic people have much higher rates of inflammation in their livers, and they also have higher rates of liver cancer. Liver cancer is the fastest growing cause of cancer death in the United States. It's not all from aflatoxin. I mean, a lot of it is baby boomers with hepatitis C, which is another kind of chronic liver inflammation. But you add aflatoxin on top of that, same thing. So there was some research done about this, and down in Texas, in southern Texas, where there are even higher rates than the rest of the country of liver cancer, and they went around and they did random blood samples to see if they could see if people were exposed to aflatoxin, and about 20% of the population had aflatoxin in their blood. And it was related to the amount of corn and rice that they consumed.
Rice?
Well, I think, it's not in the rice, but what I think is that that's sort of a marker for a traditional Mexican diet. And so, and I could tell you from my own work taking care of lots of Mexican immigrants that there's a lot of tortillas consumed. And so I think that that's what that's about. I don't think but we don't know for sure. That's me. That's, everything that I'm telling you, there's studies, there's research, there's data. I'm just trying to spare you having to look at all of it and tell you some show you some pictures. The other thing that we're seeing an increase in, moving on to that safe place to live, is an increase in diseases that are carried by insects, and most particularly mosquitoes. West Nile virus is a good example of that. When West Nile virus first came to the U.S., it was only in one state. It was in New York. And within 4 years, it had spread all the way across the country. And there's been some research done to show that temperature and rainfall were related to that spread because of the effect that they have on mosquitoes. So when the temperature is warmer, the mosquito breeding season is longer. That makes sense, right? And also, since the conditions are so nice, the mosquitoes grow up to maturity more quickly. And just like we talked about in warm water, how the Vibrio bacteria multiplied faster, the viruses, if a mosquito is carrying a virus, multiply faster inside the mosquitoes. So you get more mosquitoes who are more likely to bite you, and if they bite you, you're more likely to get an infection. This is another kind of an infection, dengue fever, that we've seen coming back into the United States. We had this here before in our southern states, but it was eradicated around the time of World War II with heavy doses of DDT for mosquito control. But dengue has made a big comeback, and you can see since the 60s the spread of dengue from around the equator into the areas to the north and the south. And this is the result not only of the effect of temperature on the mosquitoes, but also an increase in the range of the mosquitoes, because the kind of mosquito that carries dengue, or that is the best transmitter of dengue, can't survive a winter freeze. And so as we've been having milder winters, the area where those mosquitoes can live has expanded. And dengue, let's go back to dengue just for a minute. Dengue is a very painful disease to have. If you get it the first time, it's like a bad flu with a high temperature and pain, joint pains. The folk name for it is breakbone fever. But if you get it a second time, then what happens is that your immune system, which has seen the dengue before, turns around and instead of attacking the dengue, it attacks you, and the person starts bleeding because their blood doesn't clot right anymore, and then the fluids that are in their blood start leaking through their blood vessels into their chest cavity and their abdominal cavity, and then that makes their blood pressure drop. It's very, very serious, has a fairly high mortality rate. When dengue came back in the U.S., it showed up. I mean, we've had a couple of outbreaks in Texas, 7 outbreaks in Texas, and 1 in Hawaii and 3 in South Florida. When dengue came into South Florida, they only had, a small number of cases, but what was unusual is that it was people who hadn't traveled, because the only dengue that we'd seen for many years was somebody who would go out of the country, get bit by a mosquito somewhere where there was dengue, and then come back and get sick. But now we're seeing cases of people who didn't go anywhere, and they got sick. And so the public health department wanted to know how widespread this problem was, because not everybody who has dengue goes to the doctor. They might just think they had the flu and stay home, right? So they took blood samples. They went around to just random households in Key West, Florida, where the outbreak was, and they took blood samples, and they found out that 5% of the population had been recently infected with dengue. Now, if those 5% get infected again, they could have the hemorrhagic kind. That's when things get really serious. So other things that affect our ability to have a safe environment, certainly the major events like wildfires, floods, hurricanes, displace people from their homes. And over 7 million Americans have had to leave their homes since 2005 due to extreme weather conditions related to climate change. And one of the big lessons that we've learned about that is that when people are displaced, it's not the injury from the event that is the biggest healthcare need. It's the fact that most people, when you get to a certain age, have some chronic medical conditions that require medications and some degree of medical supervision to be maintained in a state of health. And when those people are separated from their medicines and their medical care, they get pretty sick pretty fast. So I went down with a team to help out after Hurricane Katrina, and I just got writer's cramp. I mean, that was what happened to me, because I was prescriptions. It was diabetics without insulin, people with asthma who didn't have their inhalers, people with high blood pressure who didn't have their medicine, people with mental illness who didn't have their medicine, people who are supposed to be on dialysis or who were in the middle of chemotherapy, and trying to figure out how to connect them up with the resources, which we finally did. And then came another hurricane right on the heels of that, and all those people had to leave again, and that whole process had to start over. So that's really the biggest consequence here when people are dislocated within our country. The next biggest consequence here is emotional. Oh, that's me. How rude. That's really rude. I'm sorry. Can you shut that up? You know what to do with an iPhone? All right. I'll stop it. Goodbye. Sorry about that. The emotional consequences of this kind of an experience can be really severe. Uh-oh, now we're in more trouble. We're back to the beginning of our presentation. Oh, no, we're not. We're good. And about 30% of the people will have symptoms of what's called post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the same thing that soldiers get when they come back from a war. So that's the consequences of internal displacement. The other thing, of course, is that we are getting off really easy in terms of climate change. We're causing most of it with our levels of CO2 emissions, but the people who are really suffering the most are people in poor countries on the other side of the world who are in a much more vulnerable situation. They, you know, they're more subject to storms, they're on lower lying land, you know, their agriculture is more precarious, and so we've already seen a large number of these folks be displaced from where they live, but eventually we're looking at, by 2050, about 200 million people who will need another place to go. And these are poor countries, and they have diseases of poverty. And tuberculosis is one that's a particular concern. Tuberculosis is a bacterial infection of the lungs, and it can be treated with medication. The treatment takes about 6 months. You have to take medicine for 6 months. And if you stop taking the medicine during those 6 months, if you miss the medicine, then you can develop the bacteria that are causing your infection, the tuberculosis bacteria, become resistant to that medicine, and then it won't work anymore. Now, in the United States, if you got active tuberculosis, anyone in this room, a nurse from the health department would show up on your doorstep every day to give you and watch you take your medication, because the consequences of missing those doses and getting resistant tuberculosis are so severe. But in countries that are very poor, where they don't have the kind of health care that we do here, that doesn't happen. And so there are lots of people who have this kind of what's called MDR, multiple drug resistant tuberculosis. And particularly in Asia and the Pacific Islands, which is the area that is predicted is going to have the most displacement, and the West Coast is where they're probably going to come. So this is a major public health concern. And not to be anti-immigrant, I'm the grandchild of immigrants, but this is just a fact when people in poor countries are displaced from their homes. Extreme heat is another thing that is another hazard of our environment, and this causes more deaths than any other kind of extreme weather event. And in Europe in 2003, 70,000 people died during a heat wave. And there was another heat wave in Russia in 2010, 65,000 people died. Well, that was a combination of a heat wave and wildfires. So you had the air quality stuff from the wildfires, and you had the heat wave. So these can be extremely lethal. We've done a fairly good job in this country, after having a couple of heat waves that were lethal, about identifying the people who are most vulnerable and trying to protect them. So, so who is it who's most vulnerable to die from heat waves? People who are elderly, people who are poor, people who live alone, and people who have chronic medical conditions. So we know that there's about a 5% increase in deaths for every degree that above what the average temperature would be during times of extreme heat.
Isn't that also because if it doesn't cool off at night?
You know, it's interesting because they have said that, but the other thing I was going to tell you about is that what has been found out most recently is there was some folks who did an analysis of Medicare data. They looked at 135 cities, and they tracked every person who on Medicare who was discharged from the hospital with diabetes, chronic lung disease, congestive heart failure, and heart attacks, and then watched to see what their survival was. And what they found is that when there was an increase in the variability of the temperature, they saw increases in deaths. And whereas we are only counting people who died during heat waves, and they went and took out all of the ones that were associated with heat waves, everything that had to do with when the ozone level was high, until the only thing left that there was to explain it was just this difference in the distance between the warmer and the cooler temperature. And we count about 600 deaths a year from extreme heat, That's what gets reported. But they found 10,000 deaths a year from this increased temperature variability in the summertime. So there's stuff we don't know. We also know that the threshold where people start dying, the temperature at which people start to die or to get sick, has to do with what temperature people are accustomed to. So for example, you know, people who live in Southern California aren't going to start having these heat-related illnesses and deaths until it gets pretty hot. But people who live up here can experience the same effects from much lower temperatures. So, so this is sort of, that was sort of the total bad news, and this is sort of the moving into the, this is the bittersweet part here. Because and I had a graph that's not showing up on here. There were two pie charts. They look kind of identical, and one of them is the source of our greenhouse gases that we emit in the United States, and the biggest ones are transportation and generation of electricity take up, you know, the largest portion. And then there was another pie chart that looked almost exactly like it, except that the wedges that were about the same size had to do with people dying of heart disease and cancer and chronic lung disease. And the reason for that is because when we burn fossil fuels, we make ourselves sick. So first of all, we're driving too much. We have, over the last, you know, since around 1960, we've been spending more and more time in the car and driving more and more miles and doing less and less of moving ourselves around under our own steam. And compared with other developed countries, Americans are the most sedentary. And what that does to us is that makes us really sick. About a third of all of the cases of diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and many common cancers are directly related to physical inactivity. We're also causing a lot of air pollution because when we burn stuff, as we explained before, we're releasing those same fine particulates that I was talking about in the wildfires. Those also come out in automobile exhausts and in the smokestacks from power plants that are burning oil or coal. And we get the same result. We get the chronic lung disease, the asthma, and the heart disease. Another cause of emissions in the U.S. is agriculture involved in meat production, because a lot of our meat comes from ruminants, and we put a lot of fossil fuel type stuff into our agriculture in order to produce the feed for those ruminants. And it makes us sick too. We're eating way more. We're eating about 1.5 times, or almost twice for men, almost twice as much as recommended amounts of meat protein for our health. And as a result, we have more diabetes, we have more cancer, and more heart disease. So about only 26% of us, on the other hand, I could, but then I have to keep going like that to poke
But
it.
it's not very far. All right.
Is it bothersome?
No, I just wondered if you were
Oh no,
worried.
oh no, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine. I got it on my hip here, you know, it's kind of like you hold the baby. So only about 26% of us eat 3 or more servings of vegetables a day, and about 80% of us are eating more meat than we should. Oh, you're not gonna. So this is kind of the almost the end of the bad news part here. We're not making any progress as a world on lowering our CO2 emissions. It's in degrees centigrade just because I wanted you to be able to see the difference, or the lack of difference, between 2010 and 2013. And the 2010 slide happened to come out in centigrade, so I just made a match. But the smaller numbers, and this are the degrees Fahrenheit. And this is the temperature that we are going to see at the end of the century if we continue business as usual. If we keep doing what we are doing now, that's where we're going. We're going to somewhere between 7 to 12 degrees increase in temperature. Now, everything that I've told you about all the changes in everything that we've talked about, all those health threats, is about 1.5 degrees increase in temperature. We can't survive a 7 to 12 degree increase in temperature. Civilization can't survive a 7 to 12 degree increase in temperature. Now the blue line there is showing what the difference would be if all of the promises that countries made about lowering their emissions were kept. And you can see that back in 2010, it was going to help a little bit. But if you look at it now, it barely makes any difference at all. And part of the reason for that is that other countries are making less promises because our country won't make any promises. So we're largely responsible. We're the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases. We have the highest per person of all of the large emitters. But our lack of willingness to commit ourselves is really making it so that no one else is going to commit themselves either. So we have a great responsibility, but it's also a great opportunity because it means that whatever we do, whatever we can get our country to do, could make the difference between survival and not survival. So the group that I work with is a bunch of doctors. And we have put together a prescription for climate action, and it's not, there's nothing in it that's radical, there's nothing in it that doesn't just make common sense. But if we did these things, we think we could get ourselves well on the way to lowering our greenhouse gas emissions, cutting them in half by 2030, which is really where we need to go. And furthermore, we would have dramatic improvements in this epidemic of chronic diseases that I keep naming to you, which are diabetes, heart disease, cancer, yeah. So one thing I want to point out is that this is not a prescription for individuals. This is not me saying you should go home and ride your bicycle or become a vegetarian, because when you saw those two thermometers and that it hadn't budged, what that's telling us is that individual consumer and lifestyle choices are not enough to make a difference. We have to do this as a country if we're going to get big enough changes in order to really make a difference. And that is a difficult thing for those of us who are not feeling optimistic about the course our country is taking, but really this is the only way that we're going to get there. So this is not a prescription for you at home, this is for us in our country and our government. We need to get people out of their cars. And lowering emissions, just increasing fuel economy is not enough, because the amount of time that people spend in their cars and the number of cars on the road are increasing, and it just cancels itself out. So we really need to promote active transportation. And there's a number of policies that do that. You have to make sure that the things that people need are within a distance that they can get to under their own steam. They have to be able to do it safely, and we need to have public transit for those longer trips and for people who are unable to walk and bike. If we did that, this is what we would gain in terms of public health. We need to be more energy efficient. We've got to stop wasting energy. That's the first thing. And we're wasting energy in our vehicles because they're not as fuel efficient as the ones that are made in Japan and in the European Union. And we're losing we're wasting a lot of energy in our buildings as well. If we did energy retrofit on every single building in the United States, we could cut our CO2 emissions by 25%. I don't see any reason why we can't do it. And we have to get rid of coal, and we have to start this transition to clean energy right now. There should be no exports of fossil fuels, no new coal-burning power plants, and the cost of dirty energy has to be up front where people can see it. We're paying for it, people. We might not pay for it at the pump, but we're paying for it in our health insurance premiums, we're paying for it in our taxes, and some people are paying with their lives. If we did that, that would clear the air, and that we would get a huge benefit immediately in terms of decrease in heart attacks and deaths from lung cancer and chronic lung disease. The total monetized value of getting rid of coal and cleaning up our cars is about $100 billion a year savings. And finally, we need to have the money that we pay to farmers pay for what we ought to be eating. So we should pay them to grow vegetables, because that's what we need to eat more of, and not to grow feed for cattle and to be burned in gasoline. And if we did that, look at the incredible benefits in public health that we would gain. We have a Lady Liberty sitting right back here. Get some costume ideas here. So, all right. Last case. I have to find it, sorry. This is one I wrote recently. And it's way in the back. Okay, back. All right. Michael Goldsmith Gutierrez was born and raised in Olympia. Even though his grandparents have diabetes and heart disease, and his mom had asthma as a young girl, he and his sister are healthy, aside from the usual childhood illnesses and injuries, and his parents are also well. They live in a house which is warm in winter, cool in summer, and powered by sun and wind. They ride their bicycles on paths that connect their home to school, work, and the market, where they buy fresh food produced by neighbors. There are still heavy storms, forest fires, and floods. Water is rationed, and there are times Michael isn't allowed outdoors because of extreme heat or mosquitoes. But before he was born, his community decided to move to higher ground, generate their own electricity with solar panels and wind farms, and make sure all their public works would withstand heavy weather. Sometimes when they sit around together in the evenings, Michael likes to hear his grandmother tell about the olden days. He likes to imagine driving fast in a gasoline car, having bubble baths, and eating food from around the world, and what it was like in the early days for the clean energy pioneers. But his favorite part of the story, I always get teary over this, is when people got together all over the earth and made their governments sign and abide by the Great Global Treaty, and how everyone worked together to build communities where people live well without warming the world. That's the ending of the story that we want. We have to write the middle. I've got some cards, and what I'm doing as I'm riding across the country is I'm collecting endorsements of this prescription for climate action from health professionals, doctors, nurses, psychologists, anybody who does healthcare things. And when I get to Washington, D.C., a bunch of colleagues are going to meet me, and we're going to have a big lobby day, and we're going to deliver these prescriptions written out with your congressperson's name in the patient slot and your local doctor's name in the prescriber's slot, and we're going to deliver them all and represent them in their opinions in Washington. So if there are any healthcare people in the room, please take a card. You go on our website. It's just a couple of clicks. It's less than a minute. And if you have any of those kind of folks in your life as friends, people who are taking care of you, relatives, please take a card and pass it on to them. And I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah?
As a former physician, do you have any comment on chemtrails and the crazy nuts who believe is a mega engineering weather?
No? I don't know anything about that stuff.
Could you repeat the question? All the questions?
Okay, as best I could. It's something about chemtrails and engineering of weather, which are pretty far beyond my knowledge as a family doctor. That's a lot in family medicine. You get to say, I don't know a lot. And thankfully, you always have specialists that you can send people to. So it's a. So I'm sorry, I don't know about that. Any other questions? Yeah.
How many physician signature prescription cards do you have so far?
I haven't I haven't sat down to tally them all, but I think I have about 60.
And you just started on your journey from
I
California?
did, but there's a group of us. I didn't write that prescription by myself. There's a group of physicians across the country who worked on that together.
So you started in California and you're writing a route that will take you to DC?
Well, I started in here in Washington. We got a lift up here. My husband and I ride a tandem, and we came up with some friends to have a little vacation ride together in the San Juan Islands, and then he and I started our trip. So.
Oh,
Wendy, tell them your route, because I think that's important. You tell them your route
Okay.
to Washington DC.
So we're kind of riding in a circle in Washington because we wanted to visit the communities that are working to prevent coal exports. So we're coming down the coast, and then when we get to Portland, we're going to go up the Columbia Gorge a little bit, and then we're going up to Yakima and Spokane, and up to Sandpoint, Idaho, where the trains are going to go through, and then over to Montana. And then we'll spend a little bit of time in the area where the XL pipeline is proposed to go, and then kind of across the Midwest, Chicago, Cleveland, and then south to Pittsburgh, and then down to DC area.
You know, when you said this is, don't take on a job for one or two people, but it's amazing what one or two people can do. Here in this area, we have no fluoride in our water because it was stopped by 3 or 4 people that got an injunction at City Hall and they were going to put it in. And we went to work and stopped it 3 times. The last time they spent over $100,000 trying to put fluoride in the water. That had nothing to do with global warming.
No.
My sister died of fluoride poisoning because she had a little kettle on the stove all day, drinking tea, and you know what that does to fluoride concentration. And they had to take both kidneys out. We also, every Friday we meet, just 15 of us really exploded Olympia. We put a couple of $1,000 worth of postcards out last week, and the Daily O said we were brain dead. But it was over global warming. And that was, I'm one of the proud members of the Friends of the Waterfront, and there was only 15 of us did that, and probably some of you got our cards. But it got everybody down to City Hall, and we had a meeting with her. It wasn't behind the doors. And I also, because my land was flooded by a developer, and he was going to put 9-story towers all across the isthmus down there. And I published 5,000 copies of a journal over in Shelton, and stood on the street corners, and we got 5,000 signatures, and he went bankrupt because he couldn't build those. So a few people can do a tremendous amount of good.
That's true. And there's many, many more people who I think are in that situation that I talked about in the beginning, that sort of climate denial situation. And the more we can help people understand that the solutions are not difficult, I think the more they will stop ignoring and join us and take action. But we have to talk about solutions. I can tell you from my experience, my 30 years experience taking care of patients, that telling people not to do stuff or telling people what to do is very ineffective. It's not empowering at all. And so we really have to focus more on what solutions there are and how people can join us and do those things, and it is, again, this is a question of big structural changes. It's not a question of people's individual habits, because in truth, I mean, it's good to make you feel better and feel like you're doing something, to buy a Prius or, garden or whatever, but it isn't going to change the fate of the planet. So we got to get out of that business of being critical and judging, and look at the big solutions and push for the big solutions and make our government work for us. That's a big enough job to keep us all busy for a long time. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, do you have any more information about the energy neutral homes and maybe retrofitting to become that?
I mean, there is a lot of information that you can find on the internet about it. It's energy neutral homes are being built now, and there's a hospital. It's a really neat story about a hospital, because hospitals are also huge emitters of greenhouse gases. We're responsible, healthcare sector, for about 8% of the nation's greenhouse gases. But there are some hospitals who have really taken that to heart and decided that it's not congruent with their mission, right? It's a conflict with their mission to heal people if they're putting out this stuff that's making people sick. So there's a bunch of hospitals that have done this, but the leader is Gunderson Lutheran, and I think they're in Wisconsin. We went through there when my husband and I did this same trip last year, and they decided they were going to be energy independent by 2014, and they're almost there. First they did a lot of energy efficiency things, and then they did a lot of clean energy projects. And when people talk about zero carbon, that's some of what they're talking about is generating clean electricity to balance what they're using. But we also visited a house that some people, it was like a model house that a family had built that was in, what's that really, really cold state that is next to Wisconsin? Minnesota, yeah. It was in Minnesota, and sorry. And it was a passive solar house, and in the wintertime, all they needed to stay warm was the equivalent energy use of a hairdryer, one hairdryer.
Wow.
So we know that these things are possible, and we know that by 2020, all of our buildings or new construction could be zero carbon. And we know that we can get an average of about a 30% decrease in energy use by doing home retrofits. There's really it'd be nuts not to do it. Yes, yellow short.
Talking about, trying to do something locally, I live in Mason County, and we had the Adage plant there trying to put up their biosolids, or biomass, excuse me. And it was all kept under the radar, and things were put in place and everything by our commissioners, the port, and the city, county, and it kind of leaked out what was going on. And a group of us formed together and fought that tooth and nail. I mean, every which way we could, and we stopped. It was going to produce 168,000 tons of CO2 a year and produce 24 jobs out of all that, plus all the pollution. And also we supported Thurston County and the good commissioners there when they were debating about putting that, what do you call it? The biomass at Evergreen. So it is possible, if the community is small even, you can get together and do something if you really want to.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm working with Karen.
No, I want to give somebody else a chance if that's okay.
I just wanted to, you were talking about zero energy buildings,
Yeah.
and the Bullitt Foundation and Dennis Hayes in Seattle you're familiar with the
I heard about it, yeah. Yeah.
It's brand new, and they have people who are leasing office space in there all have to make commitments on how they manage the building, and it is not only energy efficient, but water efficient as well, so it's doable.
Here, yes?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, I have a question for you, but a couple of comments for folks that brought up things you were talking about building in this area perhaps, and you know the eco-builders have a house that they operate out of on Adams Street, just a couple blocks from here. And if you know where Fertile Ground is, they're on Adams Street, that first house that you see there, and go check out the eco-builders have been working diligently at making sure that local building permits are such that you can actually build an eco-positive building. And I'm getting to you, but somebody mentioned about the Shorelines Management Act. Skip, I heard
Right.
you.
Yes, there's one
Yes, the
One
Shorelines
month.
Management Act, yes. And the deadline, so everybody knows, is this coming Tuesday, July 23rd, 5 p.m. If you have comments about it, look at our future. It's going to affect the next 20, 30 years. And so you may want to get your comments down to City Hall by then. And let's see,
almost to you. And Skip did mention Citizens for Pure Water. We fought the fluoride and kept that out. And though they spent the other side
100,000.
100,000, we spent less than 5,000, and we won. So don't be afraid.
3
And
times
my
we won.
question is, when are you getting to DC?
October, at the end of October.
So the end of October. So if we find people along your route to,
Yeah, we can use help.
Okay.
We can use help, and if you go on our website, you can see the route that we're taking and where we don't have events planned yet. And if you know people in those areas,
Yeah.
we'd really appreciate the contacts.
excellent. So
Yeah.
Halloween.
Okay.
Well, I live in Grace Harbor County, which has the highest unemployment rate in the state counties, and it also has a very serious health issues out there. It's one of the unhealthiest counties, and yet we have 3 companies who are trying to develop the port to handle the oil trains and export the oil. And we're fighting it very hard, but I don't know if you have time on your route to get out to Grace Harbor County. We have a group, the Citizens for a Clean Harbor. We've been talking about the oil. First of all, we talked about the coal problem and the coal train, and now we're talking about the oil trains.
But you
this is
shut down the coal trains, right? You
to
succeeded.
Grace Harbor, but not totally, not statewide. There's
Right,
still,
but into Grace Harbor,
Yeah,
you
but Grace-
succeeded with that.
yeah, Grace Harbor. Well, we hope, we'd love to take the credit. I'm not sure if we can take that credit, but we did get that. But we're working very furiously trying to stop the oil trains ruining our harbor. But the health issues that you talk about is just, would be so germane to
Yeah,
that area.
I'm
Now,
on a pretty tight schedule, so I don't know, I don't even know where it is, but maybe you can show me.
West of here.
Oh, it's
Due
west? Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to make it, but, you know, my job on this trip is to mobilize the health professionals who live in your area, and so that doesn't mean that no one will come, it just means it won't be me,
Okay.
okay? But I think we could certainly put a call out and have someone go out there and talk to you about these things. I'm not the only person who knows about it, I'm just the only person who was willing to quit her job to come out and do this, so, yeah.
When will you announce your website, and also will this be on YouTube, or do you have a YouTube that we could share with friends and family?
I don't have a YouTube, but all of the slides and the notes you can get them from the website. There's instructions on there about how to get them, and I really hope people will use them. There are tools for everyone to use. It's climate911.org.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, that's what I was going to ask too, is are other doctors using the same slides for?
No, but we'll get
Yeah.
them. You know, I mean,
Oh, okay. 'Cause
I
it's
think
very,
we're just
very
working
good.
on getting other doctors to
Yeah.
to do this, and I'm pretty sure we'll find someone.
Yeah, because it was really excellent.
Yes.
Yeah, somebody was asking about making your home more energy efficient. And thirstonenergy.org is a local organization that works with homes and businesses to make your buildings more energy efficient. So if you go to thirstonenergy.org and see if they, may be able to help you.
You emphasized at the end of your talk that individual actions that each of us drive a Prius or make our home more energy efficient are totally insufficient in the face of the enormity of what we need to accomplish fast. You're going to DC to talk to Congress. What do you think of the plan that President Obama came up with 3 weeks ago? Did you hear what he had to say?
Well, are you talking about the regulations, the Clean Air Act?
His
that's-
executive plan.
That's pretty much what he had to say. We do think, medical professionals think that CO2 is a pollutant because it's harmful to human health, and that it's covered under the Clean Air Act and it should be regulated. I mean, that's another way of putting a price on carbon. But the thing that is that those regulations were already developed and they were supposed to be put into effect. And it was put on hold not that long before he stood up and made that announcement. So I think that President Obama knows that we want to hear that something's being done about climate change, but his commitment to really do it, he really needs to still pushing. I don't think we could say, oh yeah, he's on our side. The other thing is that that's just not enough to take care of it. We really have to have things that cost money, things that require investment, which is what we have to do. We have to invest in the future that we want to see. And when it comes to money, that's Congress that has the purse strings. So we really have to move Congress. I don't see any way around it. I mean, I wish I did, because I know that's a hard thing to do. But we probably also have to do, we have to put energy into campaign finance reform, because otherwise it'll be very hard to get Congress to do what we want to do. So I for myself, I spend time on that, even though it's not my pet issue, because I think it's at the basis of all the other changes that I want to see.
What is your stance on nuclear power?
I'm against it.
Good. Just say that.
I'm a member of Physicians for Social Responsibility.
So you will be saying that when you get to DC also, you're not going to fall into like, oh, no more fossil fuels, let's just go to nuclear power?
No, I don't believe it's necessary. I think if we do the conservation things that we need to do, that we will be able to be 100% clean alternative energy by 2050.
Thank you for saying that.
Possibly,
Just make sure
hopefully
you keep saying
sooner.
that all the places
Yeah.
you go.
So, do you have a definite plan that you're going to propose, like energy efficient homes,
It's on the-
transportation?
Yeah, and it's on the
that's-
website. It's
okay.
under a prescription for climate action.
Oh, okay. And that's a prescription, okay.
Yeah, so you can get to it easily.
But it's a pretty generalized,
Well, it talks about policies that you need to
Okay.
have in place in order to make that happen.
oh, okay.
But it's not, I mean, it's not down to every detail. We're
Okay.
physicians and nurses, we're not experts on.
Yeah,
But what we did was we looked at what has worked, because there's lots of models of things that have worked in cities around the country and lots of things that are happening around the world. And so we looked at what's effective, what's been proven.
The two groups, go ahead.
So President Obama also said in that same speech, push me. So I hope when you get to the other Washington, you won't neglect to stop in and visit with him and push him and tell him, because I think he's waiting
Physically.
for that. The other thing you said at the very outset is so important, which is nobody else is going to do this if we don't lead. This is the most important thing for us to grasp, that we have to lead on this. We're the big emitter. If we don't change, nobody will.
It's true. And the only way we can do that is by making things happen in Washington, D.C. And that's why I think that we have to move our focus from what's comfortable, which is doing the things in our own lives, to what's uncomfortable, which is dealing with our dysfunctional political system.
Have an audience with Michelle. Speak to Michelle, so he can't go home.
Okay.
He can't go nowhere without hearing it.
Anybody knows how to get to them, I'll be happy to, I'll be happy to do it. Yeah.
So has there been a strategic plan put into place by some leaders that are, integrating different groups together so that there's a large national coalition with?
No.
So is there an action plan to contact the House and the Senate Representative Committees on energy and other related issues? I would suggest that we do so.
Well,
And can I find some action plans
Yeah.
on the website?
Well, like I said, it's a policy package, and that's what we've got. Nobody's getting paid to do this work. We don't have an office. We don't have anybody. We've got me and a bunch of doctors that are working really hard to take care of their patients in very hard times in healthcare. So we're trying to provide some of the big picture and some of the making the science and the reasons why we have to go the way we need to go clear. But we're hoping that maybe we can move some of the other organizations who have resources more in that direction. And I think we're seeing some of that, of our own physicians groups. And we're getting some of our professional groups that have lobbying resources to commit themselves to do more than pass resolutions and to be there when the legislation is on the floor. So, but it's not anywhere near what we might like it to be. We're still very small.
We need to grow in solidarity on his feet.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yes?
Can I answer that question? I've got an answer for that, for your last question. There's 3 huge national organizations that are working really hard on all of this. They are the NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, the Sierra Club, and the Green Party. The Green Party has recently done something fantastic. They've actually created their own cabinet. So all these, they have all their own cabinet members that are telling everybody in the United States about what the solutions are. The National Resource Defense Council is awesome. Look them up. They're on top of all these issues. Sierra Club, again, they're on top of all these issues. These are 3 passionate organizations. They're national. Get to know them, join them, get involved. These are the passionate people. There's about 3 million of them between these 3 organizations, and that's enough to really make things happen.
And there are links to those groups and some others on our website.
Sierra Club and the Green Party. The Green Party has an incredible platform. They've got a solution to all these things, all these issues that are an emergency, as you say, right now.
Okay, I want to invite all of you, who are concerned about the climate crisis to join our local group. We have a very active climate group here in Olympia, Confronting the Climate Crisis. We have 5 different working groups. We meet every month at the Olympia Center, and the working groups meet in between. We have a direct action group, which is planning and carrying out all of our direct actions, our rallies, our demonstrations. We have a positive visions working group, which is working on legislation that we hope to influence our legislators with, and working on alternative energy sources that will be sustainable. We have a divestment group, and our divestment group recently had our very first success, and that was with the county commissioners, and thank you, county commissioners, who are now beginning the process of divesting the county's share of the retirement funds from fossil fuels. We have an outreach and education group, and I think all of this is part of our outreach and education. We have a coal train and oil train working group, and they are working very hard to oppose all the plans that big oil and big coal have to make the Northwest a hub for coal and oil export. So we're doing a number of things, and I know all of you could find a place to work that would fit your comfort level and your commitment level if you join us. And so there's more information on the table back there from our group, including some flyers on our meetings. So I'm asking all of you to consider working right here in Olympia with us. Thank you.
Also on the table is information about the climate issues here in Thurston County and what some of the health effects are that we're anticipating. And also I wanted to ask somebody from the transition group, which is also sponsoring this evening's talk, to just say a moment about Transition Olympia.
Okay, Transition Olympia is one of the sponsors, and we're part of the international transition movement that's helping communities build resilience so they're better prepared to face a changing climate, a slowing economy, and coming shortages in resources. We're currently working toward a second skill sharing day on September 21st, and Gita's been working really hard on that, where many of the simple skills that our grandparents took for granted, along with new skills that we'll need for living in a changing world, these skills will be demonstrated. So you can visit our website at transitionolympia.org.
Okay, well, now let's thank